Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining. Sorry, we were a little bit late. Just had some of those common GoToMeeting problems at the last moment. So thank you, everybody, for joining. My name is Robert Booth. Unfortunately, my webcam is not working, so I won't be able to share. But I am here today to moderate the Q&A session between Seth Catalli and Chris Colwell of UiPath. So thank you, gentlemen, for joining today's session. Before we kind of get started, would you guys be able to do a brief introduction on yourself? Where you guys come from, background, so on, before we get started. So if we can start with Seth and then move on to Chris, we can go from there.
Hi, Seth Catalli here. Really nice to speak with everybody. I am the Regional Vice President for what we call a Northwest for UiPath, which is the Northern California and Pacific Northwest, and get the good fortune to work with customers in that region and to look after some of our largest customers in our company.
Great. Okay, thank you, Seth. And Chris, if you'd be able to do the same as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Robert. I'm Chris Colwell. I'm the Customer Success Director for UiPath for the West, the US West, and I support our customers in that area. I've been with UiPath about 1.5 years, and prior to joining UiPath, I was actually a customer myself. So I was with Capital Group for 13 years, the last 3 of which I stood up RPA as a capability and worked across the enterprise to scale the program.
Great. Thank you both for the introduction. I think that definitely gives us some context for the rest of this presentation. So just briefly, again, my name is Robert Booth. I'm a director here at Accelirate, and I head specifically the process discovery practice, which is one of the reasons why I'm moderating this session. So just as the title of this webinar says, it's all about RPA at enterprise scale. So now that we have those introductions, I think it's important to first state, well, what do we really mean by scale? Everybody's heard that term, many times, but what do we really mean by it, and how that correlates to common situations that clients will find themselves in. So I would like to get this from both of you. We could start with Seth or with Chris, whoever would like to take it first. But if you'd be able to provide, your definition of scaling RPA, that could at least set a precedent before we move forward.
Sure, I'll start and then I'll turn it over to Chris. But from my perspective, there are a lot of RPA programs that are in that prove stage. And when prove stage typically had a project enthusiast, somebody, it doesn't really matter what the role is. It could be over in IT, and a lot of times it is. But it certainly, a lot of times also starts in a line of business. Let's say, a specific line of business where they had a specific problem and somebody said RPA is going to help us fix it. And it's a very important phase because it really starts to get cemented in that this delivers an incredible ROI. But that's not enterprise scale, right? So what you need at that point is to move kind of into establish and expand and moving into being broader enterprise, is you need to get someone who can look across the organization horizontally and be really a mobilizer, both for resources and budget, but also just for people's time. You have to get their time share before you can get the kind of the wallet share, if you will. And on the time side, it's, why should we do this instead of what we're doing today? And for me, an enterprise scale starts to form when you're getting into about 3 different lines of business. Certainly IT might be one, but you might have a customer facing one, you have maybe more of a back office one, it's starting to spread across the organization. That's when you start looking at enterprise. Chris, what do you think?
Yeah, I absolutely agree, Seth. For me, being at scale is really having RPA and automation as a capability set up across the enterprise, as you alluded to. It's making sure that we're not reinventing the wheel and trying to reinvent what is automation, how do you set it up for each business unit individually. We're thinking about this more holistically and more of an enterprise-wide impact. Multiple business units, and really RPA and automation should be embedded into how the business operates when you're at scale. So when the business says, hey, we have some strategic outcomes, initiatives, they are thinking about how automation can better support or accelerate those initiatives. And ultimately, the business is driving the pipeline of opportunities. It's not IT going out and pulling in opportunities. It's actually the business saying, we need automation to get work done successfully, and we are going to bring the pipeline to the delivery teams.
Right. And a follow-up question for both of you, because Seth, you have more from the sales perspective, right? And then Chris from the customer success perspective. And I want to try and tie those together because it seems from what you guys just said, when we're talking about scaling, they're moving along these stages that every COE or every initiative will inevitably go through. It's more of a question, how do we get to those later stages as efficiently and effectively as possible? So from a sales perspective, Seth, and then from a customer success of what you've seen, Chris, what are some of the ways that, Seth, you mentioned 3 lines of business, right? What are some of the common hallmarks you've seen of enterprises that are trying to scale, and it's a new initiative? How do you expedite them from that proof stage that we know they all have to do, but what we're really trying to do is get them out of that, right, into the established, expand, and inevitably scale stages. So from a sales perspective, how do you translate that value to customers that say, yes, I know I want to scale, but I don't know how or where to start, whether it be outlay costs or what have you. And then Chris, from your perspective, after we get that initial buy-in and we're in that prove stage, what is it that you really focus on to make sure they move along into that establish and expand and then finally scale stages?
Yeah, good question. We're both are in the customer success business. What I tried to do in the beginning is set up the ingredients for success. And then Chris's team comes in and absolutely makes that a program, with the customers. So it's actually really important for us to work hand in hand. And Chris has taught me a lot about the really important ingredients that we ought to be working with our customers to set up. And I kind of think about it as the 3 alignments. So you have to have alignment to strategy. And when I think about that, I'm talking about, that's easy to say, but if you really think about pragmatically, there's some executive retreat that, it typically happens where you come up with your annual strategy. This is the transformation that we're going to go through this year. These are the priorities. And then you express your priorities through what? A financial plan. And in that financial plan, there's buckets of money set aside for different programs. Maybe not the specific program, but for the transformational themes, such as potentially lower operating costs or potentially change the way that we interact with the customer. And so then throughout the year, different initiatives can tap into that budget by requesting it, right? And so what we try to help organizations do is show how RPA can be relevant to each of those big transformational themes. So that gets you to the point where now you're aligned with the strategy. The second kind of alignment I think about is more organizational alignment. So this is where, RPA is the ultimate business technology, right? Business technology. So you need your CFO and your COO in the business aligned with your CIO, right? And so this is CFO, CIO alignment is never been more impactful than it can be with RPA and hyper automation technology as a whole. This is where you're literally changing the work that people do. The robot isn't just another technology. It's actually doing work. It's inputting forms and, it's doing data entry. It's doing integration between one application to another in the UI. So it's literally the closest to the end user of any technology that really the CIO uses. Beyond a productivity app, is actually doing the work, right? So I think that organizational alignment is super important. And then the third thing I'll say is execution alignment. And this is actually where Chris has a lot of expertise. And we've learned a lot from not only our customers that have gone to scale, but from our customers who've actually struggled to go to scale. And you kind of can see what are the roadblocks that they have hit versus the ones that we're able to break through. And so maybe Chris, it'd be a good opportunity to turn it over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Seth. I think if I was to boil down the ingredient list, it's really, what you see here on this slide, right? These check boxes are typically what we go through with every customer to understand, do they have the right ingredients to get to scale? I would say the most important, kind of going back to Seth's point, is what is the business outcome that, is looking to be achieved? And automation doesn't have to initiate a new idea session to think of what is the goal. Goals are already out there, like Seth was saying. The business already has strategic initiatives and imperatives that are out there. It's really thinking about how is automation going to help to get to those more successfully, faster than your competition? How can automation help ensure that you're able to stand up new revenue streams or get products to market faster or increase your margins or increase profitability? Those are the types of big business problems we see our most successful customers back their program behind. That is the North Star that justifies and really should dictate how big of a program you set up on day one and how fast you should be going quarter over quarter, year over year. I see some customers, they kind of go about this within IT and they just try to kind of, start this up as a pilot and see how it goes and start advertising the capabilities to the business. And if you look at where those customers are in 6 to 12 months, and a lot of times they come back to me and they say, hey, you know what? One of our industry peers, they're showcasing all these huge benefits they're having. What's the difference between what we're doing and what they're doing? And the clear difference is they have a business unit leader or key executive in the business that is sponsoring the program, and they've articulated what is the outcome they want to achieve by a certain point in time.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like what both of you guys are trying to say, and there's obviously a lot of ingredients, as you guys mentioned, but one key that you guys seem to both mention, as well, that I've seen with my clients, is that the most successful programs are the ones that have that macro level view early on, and have that C-suite or that executive buy-in for them to, and this is how you're able to get from that prove to establish stage a little bit quicker in my experience, because you don't want to, though you want to make sure you're evangelizing across the organization, you want to make sure that the proof of value is already understood by the time you get to this prove stage. Would you guys agree with that sentiment?
I would say is, as you're moving, prove can be funded pretty locally, like within a business unit. But as you move from establish and certainly expand, what you're really doing is you're creating some centralized resources, right? So a lot of times we call that a center of excellence. But what it is full-time professionals who do nothing but make sure this program has some resiliency and runs well. And when you're starting to do that, now your funding typically will change, right? Your funding is coming from more centralized funding budgets. And so if you kind of look at our top adopters for automation, year 1, year 2, and year 3, that funding goes way up. The amount of resources, the head count that is in that centralized group goes way up. We could probably talk about some of those numbers, Chris. But I think the main point I want to get across is, if you're going to show ROI for a centralized funding source that's going to provide value to multiple lines of business, the best way to do that is to attach to an already existing strategic initiative. There are things that your CFO and CEO are working on right now that are meant to provide $100 million of value. The $100 million plus program, right? Which is either changing the financial outlook of your company. It may be changing the way that you interact with employees and retain employees. It may be changing, a lot of times it's actually changing the way that you interact with customers. And we all know that digital channels, whether it's across employees or customers, are completely transforming our business. So as we move to a more digital business, there is a program already in your company that's meant to deliver hundreds of millions of dollars in value. Now, the question is, are you going to connect the dots to tangibly connect to that program back to your RPA program? And if you do, then the RPA program will expand and get the resources that it needs.
Gotcha. No, that definitely makes a lot more sense and ties it in better. So thank you both for that input, because that definitely helps provide some context with our next slide. Seth, you already actually mentioned part of the subject of it, and that's really this, and I'm calling it a concept, but really the $100 million problem. We've heard it as of late in some of these UiPath sessions, as well as I've heard it from some of my colleagues around the industry, is this $100 million problem. And I really feel it's a concept about what we were just talking about before. To get to that scale, you need to look at the problem from a little bit wider of a lens. So again, just from both of you, would you guys be able to provide, some context of what is meant by this $100 million problem? Why is it important, and how it kind of correlates to what we just talked about?
Yeah, the word problem could, in some cases you put a line through that and you write in red on top of it opportunity, right? So it's really two sides of the same coin, which is for every organization right now, forget about RPA for a minute. Sometimes what we do as technologists is we think, hey, we got to go find the solution that we can solve with RPA. You forget about it for a minute and say it's not the technology that matters. Let's talk the language of the CFO. What is the CFO really focused on as you look at the 2 and 3 year, and 4 year and 5 year plan? There is a large initiative in your company right now, and they are looking for people who are on the front lines who can move the needle for the organization to step up and provide solutions. And the point of this is to say that that $100 million, don't put a ceiling on yourself. Look for the big opportunity within the company, and then let's connect the dots back to RPA. And when we do that, what we find is oftentimes we are in conversations where the scope of the solution wasn't what we originally considered. I'll give you a really tangible example. So we've had great customers take RPA into order to cash, and then they went right after specifically the order management business problem. In order management, there was a lot of transactions, and what they were able to do was double the amount of transactions that they were able to handle over a 1 year period, but actually kept headcount the same, and in some cases repurposed headcount into other areas that are more customer facing. For example, sales operations, and then right into like a sales help desk. And so really in the order management function itself, actually reducing the amount of people, and certainly of people per transaction, went way down. So what you have is touchless transactions that are performed perfectly every time. Now that is a very viable place to go focus your RPA technology. It's a highly rules-based work. However, when you widen the lens, what the CFO came back and said afterwards is, because we were getting the throughput faster, we were able to provision our product quicker to our customers, deliver our product quicker to our customers. It actually affects how we recognize revenue. We're able to recognize revenue on average about a week earlier than we previously had been when there was manual touches. And that in turn provides working capital benefit. And if you start looking at the amount of working capital that they have in just getting 7 days earlier, recognized revenue, that changes how they can potentially pay their vendors, which maybe takes advantage of discounts on the accounts payable side, right? It gives them cash that they can do other things they're strategic with. So there's a benefit right at the individual project level, but when you move back, there may be a working capital business opportunity that is much larger that you're impacting as well.
Okay. No, it makes complete sense. Chris, anything you want to add to that?
No, I think Seth is spot on. The only thing I would add is that we say the $100 million problem, but what we're really trying to say is, automation can be applied to almost any business strategy, business initiative. I think what is important is we get to what is that quantified big picture outcome we're looking to achieve, so that we get, like Seth said, the right type of sponsorship, visibility, and investment that's going to make the program successful. I mean, I have customers that say, hey, you know what? We want to cap our headcount growth at this, and automation will be the lever that we use to ensure that happens at a company-wide level. I have, customers that say, hey, you know what? Employee retention and employee experience is really important to us, so we're going to use automation to help with that. Or it could be customer retention and CSAT, customer satisfaction. But I do see, obviously, more and more organizations recently, I would say ever since we entered this COVID era, kind of focusing on these bigger picture and more transformative strategic initiatives. And they're really plugging in automation into the way that business gets done within the company. So.
Right. Okay. No, great. Thank you. So it sounds like organizational alignment is a really key component for a lot of these. So great, that helps. And we've defined kind of what we mean, or what you guys have meant by scaling RPA and this $100 million problem or opportunity, right? And how we approach and how they tie together. But I think one of the remaining and also most important concepts we need to address when it comes to scaling RPA, and that's a rep, or a robot for every person. So now this concept has really, in my opinion, been at the core of UiPath since since as long as I can remember. I've been working with UiPath since 2015, but it's been getting more of a push lately since Daniel Dinesh a couple of years ago talked about this. So I think that it definitely does tie in. And what I want to ask both of you before we hand this off to the audience to get some questions is, can you guys give your thoughts on what you think a rep is? What is the concept of a rep and how that correlates with the $100 million problem, or as Seth said, the $100 million opportunity, and why it's going to be so fundamental moving forward?
Yeah, I'll start. And I don't think there's any question that we will have, and I have already, a tray on my laptop that represents my most common transactions. And when I want to execute them, right on my laptop, I just click, and behind the scenes, a bot's doing that while I can continue to do the business that I want to do, which is typically more analytical or interacting with people. So does anybody doubt that humans are going to move and will continue to move? The arc is already there to more analytical work and to more meaningful work, and that the more transactional work will be turned over to software and to software digital assistants. This is already happening in so many areas of work. So here's what I would like to say as a takeaway on that. When we think about the unattended back office type of work that robots do, a lot of times we think about the ROI of what the robot does. When we start to think about a robot for every person, we turn our ROI or our value calculation, I think, the other way, which is it's really about what we do with the freed up time. So for example, I'm in sales. If I think about my sales organization and I think about how long it takes to ramp up a new employee into the team and to be productive, one of the things I might think about is, what could a bot do to accelerate that ramp? And if that ramp was accelerated, how would I measure it? I wouldn't measure it by what the bot was doing. I would measure it by that salesperson potentially brought in one new customer in the first 3 months than they would have otherwise. And then you start adding to up the value of that from a revenue standpoint. So the measurement in my world would be maybe net new revenue and a brand new customer. And that would be our KPI that we would look at, because it's about what the people do with the freed up bandwidth that they have that the robot delivered.
Fair enough. Oh, that makes complete sense. I like how you said, actually thinking about it, what is the extra time that we're going to be able to get out of this, right? I think not many people think like that. It's more just, well, what's the bot saving, instead of thinking, well, what has the bot saved you that you're now able to focus on? And that's a great point. Chris, is there anything you want to add to that before we move forward?
Yeah, I think the simple definition, as I always told my customers, the robot for every person gives you the ability to put a robot in the hands of every person in your organization. It could even be within certain business units or teams at first, but ultimately it's there to help accelerate human achievement, right? To accelerate, improve, and ultimately scale the abilities of your human workforce and allow them to focus their time, like Seth said, on the most valuable, meaningful, and honestly rewarding work. We see that a lot of our customers, as they go down this journey of a robot for every person, some of the first teams that end up having robot for every person deployed are customer facing teams, right? Because any time you can spend with a customer versus doing data entry or data, assimilation on the screen, is going to be super valuable for customer satisfaction and honestly even for accuracy. So we see a lot of customer facing teams going down the journey, a lot of finance and accounting teams, maybe some of the regular recurring processes that folks have to trigger ad hoc, maybe reporting processes or month-end close processes where you want a little bit more of the associate interaction. They're using robot for every person type methodology, but really you could apply this, at a team level, a department level, or an enterprise-wide level. And I think the customers that are going down this route are seeing significant outcomes, and honestly, they're able to retain employees much more successfully in comparison to some of the other companies that we were talking to.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. Okay, well, gentlemen, thank you for your time. So I can definitely say it's definitely been helpful for me, and I'm sure informative for getting your insights on these fundamental topics for myself and the audience. But before we pass it off to them, I just have a question for both of you. It's something that I ask basically on these webinars I'm doing because I'm interested in your opinions on these. Is there's more or less trends every year, if you will, about what is it that the market is kind of wanting, right? So in 2019, we saw more of a push towards COE enablement with Automation Hub, and then towards the end of the year, process mining with the Process Gold acquisition. A lot more into the discovery part of it, task mining, so on. What do you guys see as being a quote unquote a top trend that you feel a lot of customers are going to start venturing or exploring into beyond just regular RPA for 2021?
Well, I'll tell you, from my point of view, from where I stand, it was a couple of years ago that Gartner came out with the idea of mode 1 and mode 2 in terms of IT. Mode 1 being more about legacy applications and trying to retrofit them to digitize them, and mode 2 being more out in the lines of business, working at the points of innovation with technologies. And you see that in that, now we have analytic tools that are now on everybody's desktop, right? We even have data wrangling type tools that are on everybody's desktop now. And one of the things that I'm seeing is that whole concept of a low code or no code application builders, where citizen developers can create their own applications. At the heart of that is automation. And so ultimately, if you look at who's going to kind of win that part of the desktop, I think there's a good chance it could be a company that has a really strong RPA DNA like UiPath.
Makes sense. Chris, anything you want to add to that?
I still think we are, I mean, honestly, I think process mining is going to take off. I think we are still, not where we should be. Like, in terms of customers I see out there using process mining, I think that now with the latest indications I'm seeing from my customer base, there's more and more appetite to go after this. It's shocking given we live in such a data-driven world that customer after customer I go talk to, the way that they find out what a process is, and a lot of times they don't have it documented, is they go and ask business SMEs, the people on the ground doing the work. What are the steps? How do you do it? What are the durations? What are the exception paths? It's incredibly manual, and honestly, it's not that accurate either, right? It's going to be the perception of whatever person you're talking to. Process mining allows you to get a data-driven view of what the process looks like, the exception paths, the durations, and make decisions based on data of where you're going to go automate, where you're going to optimize, maybe where you can remove steps entirely. So I'm seeing a lot more momentum around that product. And I think 2021 is going to be a big year for process mining.
Okay. I'm excited to see actually how that turns out. I definitely have some vested interest in process mining as well. So thank you guys for those answers. I know it's 12:30. We started a little bit late. There's a couple of questions on the tray. If you don't know, on the right side, there'll be a questions where you can answer it. I'm only going to really be able to get to one or two at most, but you can send them privately after. And one of these questions that I definitely want to ask is as it relates to AREP. And you kind of touched on this a little bit, Chris, but what they're asking is basically when you're talking about AREP or robot for every person, is this something that you can implement early on in your journey, like you're in that prove phase? Or is it for more mature COEs that are really starting to get to that scaling or expanding stages?
Yes, you can implement AREP right out of the gate. There's really not a need to be a more experienced RPA shop to go after AREP. In fact, I see customers doing AREP on day one, especially in those customer-facing type organizations like call centers, right? It's really the same concept of you have a COE or full-time developers working off a pipeline. The only difference is instead of deploying it to an unattended bot, you're deploying it right onto the UiPath assistant or menu for those folks who are going to be using the robot. So it really is not associated with maturity. That's a misconception we should break down and really encourage folks that can be part of your day one go-to-market with automation.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because that's one thing, the reason why I wanted to make sure I got that question in there, because I think that's a fundamental misunderstanding people have, is thinking that you need to be at some certain stage to do that. So gentlemen, thank you both, Seth, Chris, for your time today. It's 12:32, so I know that there's a couple of remaining questions. If you guys have any, we'll be sending a follow-up email with the contact information, so you can reach out to any one of us, Chris, Seth, or myself. Thank you both for your time today. Not sure if there's anything else you guys would like to add.
Just thank you.
Yeah,
Appreciate
thank you.
everyone's time.
All right, thank you very much. Take care.